and runs. So we haven't introduced this car yet, but this is my 2000 B5 S4. I just finished putting the engine harness back together because this car has been sitting for probably, I don't know, 2-3 months. It had a no start issue. There was a night I was driving it and that simultaneously the driver's side axle broke on me, and then when I went to start it up after, the car wouldn't start. So I was like, what are the odds of those both failing at the same time? So I was doing some work yesterday. I found that the wiring harness was sitting on the exhaust manifold, so I decided to just rewire the whole harness. Not the whole thing, but whatever part was sitting on the exhaust part. I cut the harness open, I redid all the wires, I soldered them, I put heat shrink over it and rewrapped it in harness tape, so it looks super factory. So after that, I pulled the lower dash panel off because these things have issues with their clutch pedal sensors, which won't let you start the car without the key. So I pulled the relay out, and you can jump the relay. It's relay number 53 for the Volkswagen Audi guys watching. And if you jump relay 53, it'll basically delete the clutch safety switch from the circuit. So I did that, and the car cranked over with the key. Right now, we're just putting the harness back together. I'm gonna go ahead and assemble these check valves back together. I'm gonna put the white pipe back on, the pancake valve, the oil separators in the back, and then we'll get this thing on the ground, give it a good rinse, and then tell you some more about this car and what it's got done to it. Yeah, man. Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Look at that. Photosynthesis. What? In case you're not aware, this is called the throttle body boot, and this is like the #1 cause for boost leaks on the B5 S4. There's a ton. There can be wastegate leaks, wastegate line leaks, all kinds of issues, but this little throttle body boot likes to form hairline cracks, especially if it's the stock one. It'll form hairline cracks in the center here where you can't see it, or towards the back. So if you haven't replaced this with a silicone one, it's definitely a thing to do. Yeah, I have stock plastic bipipes. Don't roast me because Big Brother with his S4 stole my aluminum ones. Alright, so what we got here are APR R1 diverter valves, which are pretty expensive, but like APR is kind of hit or miss for their parts, but these seem pretty solid. So a way to check if a diverter valve is any good, you can check it with a vacuum gauge, which I've done before. You just pump it to, I can't remember exactly how much in vacuum, but you basically hook up the pump, open it up in vacuum, and this diaphragm should stay open, and then you just monitor to see if it loses vacuum pressure. But the way you can check it with your hand is like this. It's pretty simple. Once you remove it from the car, because you want to be able to see inside this little cylinder here, take your thumb or an index finger and push up that valve, and take your finger, push it on top of the nipple here on the valve. And you see how it's open just a hair? You can still blow through it. The minute you let go, it closes. No more air. This car is a stage 3 and it's on E85, and I'm running about 26-27 PSI. I fixed the wastegates flappers in the back with just some cheap helper springs, and it brought it up to about 24, but it still wasn't quite the 26-27 like it was supposed to be. So I now just discovered that this brand new Bosch 710N diverter valve, which is a Porsche part, which is a very common upgrade for these Audis, is no good. You can actually see there's a little part of the diaphragm that's torn over there at the top, and if you do the vacuum test, doesn't even hold for a second. So this one's toast. Yep, that one's failed too. So once we put these APR R1 diverter valves back in, we should see a big increase in boost pressure, especially since I found a pretty big leak back towards the N75 valve. There was a wastegate line that was torn. So gonna get inside there, man. You know what I'm saying? Before you give me any shit, these zip ties are OEM for these diverter valve lines. This, Audi guys, is your brake booster check valve. Although it's a check valve and it's related to vacuum, I've been told this is a #1 cause of boost leaks as well. It's a very common part to fail. So if you look up on FCP Heroes catalog, you can find the Porsche brake booster check valve. It's supposed to be a little bit stronger. I think people just get it because it says Porsche and it makes me feel special. That's why I got it, because it made me feel special. Now I don't feel so, you know what I'm saying? Sober, I can't say that. Anyway, so always replace this brake booster check valve because it's going to fail. So basically, if you buy one of these, even if it doesn't have boost leaks, if it hasn't been done, do your brake booster check valve. These green check valves here, always replace them because they fail. What check valves do is they allow vacuum to go one way and not the other. So it's super important. Replace these, especially this one. This one over here at the end of the fuel rail that's connected to the F hose, which has been deleted on this car, is a massive boost leak source, including the PCV that's hooked up beneath it is also a huge boost leak source. So fix all of those first and you'll be golden. Alright, so we jumped relay number 53, which is a clutch pedal sensor. So we're going to go ahead and give it a crank and see if it starts up now. Hopefully that's our issue. It runs! Alright, this is very uncomfortable, but I'm doing this because I love our viewers. Well, we just heard the startup video. It idles pretty good. It was rumbling like a boxer at first because cylinder 4's coil pack I forgot to plug in. So, oh shoot, I'm getting old. Oh. Alright, so there's a couple issues with this S4. Number one, they took a gigantic 2.7 liter V6 twin turbo and stuffed it into a chassis designed for an inline 4. So what does that mean? There's no space to do anything, which is why this is an engine removal out type of car for turbo replacements or anything. So with that said, this harness that sits in the back that I just rewired, what happened before is it was sitting on the exhaust and it melted a bunch of wires together. That's all been fixed. I can even hear in the idle the way the car sounds. It just sounds so much better. It used to be sputtering and really shaky at idle. It sounds pretty good now. So with that said, I'm a very meticulous person, but unfortunately I'm gonna have to get creative with some zip ties, which I hate, to get this harness to kind of sit away from the exhaust and to sit away from these two studs. If you have an S4 and you haven't checked yet, remove your coolant bottle. These two studs right over here can cut through the back of the harness, so that's one thing to watch out for. It's happened to a bunch of guys. Or the exhaust. So we're gonna just zip tie it up in a way that keeps it away from the heat and any sharp objects. So like I explained before, one of the things we're doing to get this car ready for the show was we're fixing the wiring harness. The way the exhaust is set up on this car is pretty peculiar. The exhaust manifold sits right under the valve covers, of course, just like any car. But the exhaust comes up really high at the very back of the corners where the EGTs would go in for US 4 guys. So with that said, what you've got to watch out for is make sure your O2 sensor wiring isn't sitting on that exhaust. You also want to make sure that your rear part of your wiring harness isn't sitting on the super hot coolant pipe or the exhaust as well. So we just kind of elevated all of that out of the way and used a couple cable ties to kind of keep it out away from the heat. Make sure those wires are not sitting on anything that's hot. It's not designed to sit on 200-degree coolant or 200-degree oil. Also, for you high mileage guys out there, actually I don't care if you've got 20,000 miles, check your wastegate lines and your wastegate trap doors in the back of the turbos. You can reach this one down here if you remove the coolant bottle. I wouldn't recommend doing it with the hot engine. You will scald your fingers. Ask me how I know. I got even darker than I was when I touched that, which is crazy. So you can touch the back of the wastegate door. There shouldn't be any play in the back of the door. It should be super tight. You shouldn't be able to flick it open at all. Maybe barely. But when I first discovered this car had a bunch of boost issues back when it was stuck at like 13 pounds, now it's at 26. I went to the wastegate doors and they were just flapping around like this. So check your wastegate doors, check your lines because they will leak. You can use a Mighty Vac with a positive pressure gauge, hook it up to the lines over here next to the N75, and then check if they're leaking. And then if that's not leaking, your wastegate doors are good, check your N75 valve, get a brand new one. Don't get the N75J valve, get the brand new OEM one from Volkswagen. And that pretty much covers essentially all of the boost leaks you got to look for on this car. Everybody, let's go. Let's go down to Abelardo's, cause they've got authentic Mexican food, and screw what anyone says. If you zoom in on my knees, I'll kill you. As I was explaining earlier, I'm a very meticulous person. I believe in heat shrink, soldering, no electrical tape. I hate these butt connectors. But, like I explained before, we had to jump the relay for number 53 because the clutch pedal sensor switch is no good and that wasn't allowing the car to start with the key. So to make this more legitimate, this is just a little loop wire. But instead of just shoving the wires inside of it, we're gonna probably get a smaller gauge wire because these won't work. But we're gonna crimp it to these little butt connectors, or whatever these are called. They have a specific name. And then coincidentally, a size of a relay tooth is like the exact same size as that. So they'll slide straight into place and you don't have to worry about them falling out while you're driving. Will you stop zooming in on the sweat on the side of my face, please? Ah! All right, so lower dash removal is pretty easy. It's, I think 3 bolts. 1 bolt here behind the fuse panel, 1 under the little beauty cover for the lower dash here, and then there's also a little tiny rectangle cover that you need to pop off. They're all 8mm. So Cole, if you want to come down here, the relay I removed that controls the clutch pedal safety switch is right over there, that one that's open. So all you need to do to bypass it, which I don't recommend doing for long term, because if you start your car without the clutch, with it being in gear, that can end pretty bad. So you just want to come in there just like that, slide those pins in. If you look at the wire right up there, that's all it takes to delete the clutch pedal sensor. I know the light's a little too exposed right now, and this isn't supposed to be an instructional anyways, because if you blow up your car, it's not on me. But basically, it's pretty simple to bypass your clutch safety switch. I would recommend doing this if you have a no-start condition. You can have the ignition switch that fails, because it's an Audi B5, it's early 2000s, so they're made out of plastic, and the gears will break, and then you can't turn the key all the way. That can cause a no-start condition. Next, you want to check that. A lot of people will say check the crank sensor. That's a yes and no. If your crank sensor goes out and even if it's unplugged, the car will still crank. It just won't turn on. So if you're getting a no crank issue, check this. Check your ignition switch. And then from there, check your grounds on your starter. Check the grounds underneath the car. Check the grounds underneath the coolant bottle. And then lastly, check the grounds on the starter and the power wire. Beautiful. So for all the B5 guys watching, I have the full cowl cover, including the battery tray, and I bet yours doesn't. How does it taste? Usually, if you guys know, this upper cowl piece is always missing, including this, and especially the gasket's always gone. Why it's important is because the way they set up this car with the drainage going underneath the hood to the floor, if you don't have some of those covers, water can get into your ECU box and it'll fry it. Luckily, this is a non-immobilizer car, so you can just swap in another ECU and retune it, and it's not a big deal. Otherwise, it can go down into the footwell and mess with a bunch of stuff. Especially if you're an automatic, your transmission control unit sits underneath your passenger side carpet. So definitely make sure you get a set of those. If you ever see them at a junkyard, snag them. They may look like they're just plastic, but they are very important. What's that noise, man? Little misfire with the idle. I need to make sure I have the injectors plugged in the right place, because when I removed this harness, I didn't label anything. But it's possible I maybe switched a couple of injector wires apart, and that's important because there's a certain firing order that needs to be attended to. Actually, I'll show you. So, over here, I don't know if you guys will see it, over here in German it says Zündfolge. The firing order goes as following: 1, cylinder 1, cylinder 4, cylinder 3, cylinder 6, cylinder 2, and cylinder 5. which is why it's super important if you flip the coil pack connectors back and forth from cylinder 5 to 6, it's gonna idle like crap. I don't think that's what happened, but we'll just kind of double check everything and see. With that said, that was the S4 introduction. We got the wiring harness back together, we put the valve covers back together, the coil packs, all the wiring, and started it. It idles really good, so stay tuned. We'll film a story video on this car pretty soon of how I acquired it and kind of everything that's done to it. So just stay tuned, we'll have more content out on this car. Thanks for watching.